to me, creating killer content is not about quantity, it's about quality. And yes, you need a specific amount of quantity to be able to keep it fresh and that sort of thing, but we've learned very quickly, as have our clients, that you need to let things play out. It's okay to say the same kind of message for several quarters, and whether we believe it or not, we didn't reach everybody in the universe with our first webinar or campaign that we did, so it's important to be consistent.
Right, and you can see where it's measuring with a high effectiveness rate within one vertical, and you can possibly replay the same content into a different vertical. But we see with a lot of the digital asset management systems we deploy is that these companies have been, you might do a photo shoot of a beach in China, but you also might be repeating that same thing in Iceland and London. And you could have used those same images in the same catalogs, but they didn't realize that they were doing that. Think of the money you can save when you can not only find the assets, but know that all of these same projects are going on to the same end.
Right.
So really being able to find it, reuse it, and then repurpose it in the exact right spot for people that it'll resonate with.
And you're only going to and you're only going to know that if you have a strategy, right?
That's right. That's right. So the other thing that you and I were talking about the other day is this big rollback to doing content in-house and kind of the rise of the in-house agency, if you will. Google and Apple come to mind as some of the top contenders that have gone. I think Google even states they don't have an agency of record, and Apple claims that it's brought, I think, up to 50% of its work back in-house.
Yeah, it really goes back to people that know the message and understand the message. What marketers are learning, but they're only learning this if they track it, measure it, have a strategy in place. Because back to that, what do you do? What's the value of the marketing team? You need to be able to show that visibility to the executive team about what you're doing. And then by having something like an in-house agency, and many of these creative teams or even marketing teams are evolving, like you said, Google, Apple, Lego, I mean, there's many to choose from. They realize that the cost of trying to bring an outside agency up to speed on your message is more effort, cost, you lose time, some of those type of things. So a lot of work has been done in documenting that rise of the in-house agency, and something, if those on the phone haven't considered, I would highly recommend that you look at some of those options.
For sure. Something that comes to me too is that to do content marketing really effectively, especially in-house, you can control more of the brand message and keep it much more consistent. And not only that, but you have to have a stomach for being adaptive and trying different things. It's really a lot about experimentation. And on a recent Adobe survey of senior executives on the C-level, only 20% said they could really stomach much churn in the types of content marketing they're seeing, that they really wanted to see consistency, whereas it really is about experimentation and trial and then seeing what works and then dialing that in.
That's right. One other piece that you see on this slide, for example, and something we've done here is we don't even have product marketing within the organization. And the reason for that is that we don't want to be talking about the product. We want to be talking about the problems we solve. And something that's kind of a classic problem, I think, across the industry right now is that especially tech companies have this notion of product marketing. So all of their content, what's it going to be about? It's going to be about products. Versus like in my title's case, go to market, we talk about the problems that the team has, that the creative team has, or the marketing team, or the IT team, and it really helps the entire organization to solidify around the problem you're solving and not the product.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've got a friend that's a chief product officer at a company here in Silicon Valley, and they've been redoing their website on and off for the past 2 years, and they're so frustrated with their marketing department because they keep saying they still haven't nailed down what problems we solve. They're only listing features of the product. Yep. They still haven't been able to explain that elevator pitch. What's the 4 to 7 words or whatnot of what we do, for who, and how. Consistently, though, the #1 content marketing challenge is having enough time and bandwidth to create the kind of quality content that gets results. Content marketers say that they just can't create enough of it and that it's very difficult to measure how well it's working.
Yeah, and it goes back to part of what we were discussing a little bit earlier, that without a strategy, without everybody having visibility into what you're working on, it's sort of like going to a meeting and not having an agenda. If you don't know why you're producing a piece of content, then you probably shouldn't be creating it. Or the classic one, and I've just got off an email thread on this, was, if we just had a piece of collateral on this thing, then we could sell more. And that, I think often we fall into a trap as content marketers, that just because the number one sales rep asked for it, or even the CMO or CEO asked for it, if you have a strategy, then it helps to what I call reduce fake work. And fake work is things that seem important, but in reality are ineffective and short-lived. So I don't know if you've ever seen that, Jill, where you've been asked to create a data sheet because then it will solve all my problems.
Yeah, actually, I have a email request right now for printed materials because it's important to have printed materials. And then my other favorite one is, hey, let's create an infographic because it'll go viral.
That's right.
I don't think either one of those is a good project all by itself. It definitely has to have an objective and a measurable result set.
Right, and the other side of your slide there that's creating this chaos is there are more channels than ever before. I mean, you look at the history of marketing, it used to be there were 2 or 3 channels. Maybe it was radio and television and print and, then email. But now you've got all these mobile devices, and you've got Pinterest and Instagram and LinkedIn, and you've got a lot of different places. And that explosion of channels and the constant change of how consumers are consuming the information, again, lack of strategy on where are we going to target, where are these teams that we're targeting or people that we're targeting, you'll end up having to create, I don't know how many, looks like hundreds you have in that picture, a different piece of content for every one of those.
Yeah, and at this point, really it comes down to a single place of truth for your content. One product we deploy, SendShare, that's actually the entire idea behind it, is that you create the content one time and then you can repurpose it multiple times for any language, geography, any channel, but that your team only creates it one time, and then your latest version is always there with some customizable bits to it.
Right.
But really, at the end of the day, unless your content is compelling and contextual for the person receiving it and feels personalized, consumers get to pick amongst all these thousands of channels exactly where they want to receive it and how they want to interact with your company and your message.
That's right.
Yep. They're in control, not the enterprise. So too many cooks in the kitchen makes this a collaboration hell for creating content. I love Super Bowl ads. It's so easy to make fun of Super Bowl ads and to say which one's your favorite and to critique it, but none of us really ever get time to create one, do we?
No, and we had a fun little exercise here at Workfront. Our CMO brought us all in, and we did critique all the different Super Bowl ads, or not all of them, a select few. And it's kind of funny, just like this cartoon. As soon as the Super Bowl's done, or right before the Super Bowl, somebody in the C-suite says, if we just had a Super Bowl ad, we would reach everybody, and then we would sell more. And everybody, just like you say, too many cooks, but everybody thinks they're a marketer. Anybody can do marketing. And so, like I said in my previous example, sales, hey, if we had a piece of collateral. The CEO, hey, if we just did a Super Bowl ad. The list goes on, and you do end up in this collaboration hell, or in a situation. I've never done a Super Bowl ad, but I could just imagine, because of the cost, all of the approvals, and I don't like puppies, and somebody else wants horses, and that's just got to be crazy.
I can't even imagine. And now with you can see immediately how it performs online with Twitter feeds and everything. That it used to be at least you could wait at least an hour or something for Nielsen ratings to understand how your ad did. Now you know in seconds whether you have a job the next day or not.
Yeah, and they're even releasing them before the Super Bowl. So.
Right. The number one thing that most content marketers say is the most difficult part of creating content is actually the collaboration. And that's because too many balls in the air means a lot of them are getting dropped due to lack of communication.
Yeah, and I
really,
mentioned.
It comes down. Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead.
I was going to say it comes down to the process and the way that you're communicating, if it's within a single system or across email, chat, Skype.
Well, and it goes back to what I said about fake work in my mind, because there's always something else you could do, and there's always a new request that's coming in. But without a single source of truth and knowing the importance of something, maybe it's okay to let a ball drop. If, like in this picture, I would certainly hope that Atlas would hold up the world and not worry about some of the other stuff. But
exactly.
That's the part I know. As creatives, as content marketers, it's really hard for us to say no. And so without a single source of truth or visibility, or frankly even other people have visibility into what I'm working on, balls get dropped, and then I look like the bad guy. They do end up outsourcing to an agency. I don't get the cool work. Those are all things we hear quite a bit.
Absolutely. And I think that being a cost center within the organization that marketing typically is, it's even extra important for marketing and creative departments to be able to show exactly where they make a difference, where their resources are being spent, and that they are spending their time on the priority projects, not the fake work.
Right.
So missed deadlines. When things don't get communicated very well, deadlines get missed, even though there's multiple reminders and extensions. My favorite is the business sponsor at the nearly executive level of a large project that could never make it to the project meeting, right?
Right. Yeah, these are, the interesting thing about deadlines for marketers, and I tell our clients this all the time that really resonates. Mother's Day is Mother's Day, whether I like it or not. It's going to be on that day. Christmas is Christmas Day. And so there are things that, unlike maybe an engineering team that's saying, hey, you know what, I can't quite meet this deadline, the organization tends to be more forgiving to them. But nobody's going to forgive you if you miss the deadline, for example, for this webinar or for a big trade show or something like that. But if you're, to the previous slide, if you've got so many balls that you're juggling, and the one important one is the one falling to the ground, if you do miss that deadline, it could end up being your job, unfortunately.
It's true. Absolutely. This is one of my favorites. Losing content down the drain and email hell. Some people have up to over 2,000 emails in their inbox. That's like 10% of them. But 33% of workers would rather clean toilets than their email inbox. It's this thankless task, and the next thing you know, another email's popped in from someone you don't want to receive it from.
Well, it just illustrates the point that I think we've got. I hear quite a bit when I follow up with people, well, I emailed them, and so my task is done. And emailing somebody, it's like I tell my wife, emailing me that I need to pick up bread on the way home from work does not constitute I received it and that I'm going to do it. It's just a queue of things in my list. I happen to be one of those that has the 2,000 unread emails, and part of it, frankly, is it is a queue. It's not my task list. But how many times, Jill, do you see customers using email as a task list or a repository for all of my content?
Right, and so it's either in their inbox or it's sitting on their desktop that doesn't even get backed up. If we're lucky, it's at least on a shared file server or in the cloud, like on Dropbox, so at least everyone can get access to it if the computer hardware dies or something like that. But it's definitely a problem. I totally agree with you. And as far as email goes these days, it turns out that the slower you are to respond to it, half of it will resolve itself.
That's right. It's funny too, because the quote that we hear over and over again is, email that document to me again so it's at the top of my inbox. And that's a common phrase that you hear over cubicle walls or between offices, because you just don't know if you have the latest version. And just like it says here, I'd rather clean the toilet than clean out my inbox to find something.
Yeah, my favorite is that for we, of course, work with primarily digital asset management and workflow automation solution vendors. And so a lot of my job is working with the marketing people in these departments of these companies. Well, recently I've had to send the same content marketing survey report 5 times, so it would be in this person's top of their inbox.
Yeah.
And I won't say who they work for. So Content Hell Part 4A. Now, time vampires. It turns out that people want to steal your time, your very precious time, the only thing you really have in this world, very often and everywhere you look. Status meetings are pretty awful.
Yeah, it's crazy. We also talk about this with our clients, is that as marketers, whether you're content marketing or any other part of marketing, you're always trying to create time. And unless there's some new physics thing that I'm not aware of, that's just impossible. So you end up in these constant, like you said, time-sucking vampires where, especially we've seen a lot in agencies where the client wants that, just, can you give me another update? Can you give me another update? And if the client is requesting that many updates, it's probably because they don't have any visibility into the work that's being done. And if you have a single source of truth where people can go to see, it's kind of like when I send a box with FedEx. I can track it. I know where it is. It's in Minnesota now, and now it's delivered. With that sort of tracking, it just becomes a black hole, and the way people fill that black hole is they set up status meetings.
Right. When I used to be at a large enterprise that shall remain unnamed, as we got closer to a software launch, we would have more and more status meetings. So when you're 18 months out, you can just do a monthly status meeting, and then it's every 2 weeks. And then by the time you're 3 months out, you're having weekly meetings, and then by the time you're a month out, it's like daily meetings. And you might have 20 people in the room. Can you even imagine how expensive those meetings are?
Yeah, my previous company, we would fly people into one single location to have multi-day meetings for status updates every quarter. And I know just having that meeting probably cost us well in excess of $100,000. And what do people do in those meetings? Everybody's waiting for their turn to give the status update, so they're working on their laptops, not paying attention to the person presenting until it's their turn. We've done some of those infographics talking about that, we're not saying that you'll never have to do a status meeting, but if you can give even 10% more status updates and have people see the visibility into the work you're doing, I promise you'll see these status meetings go down significantly.
Yeah, actually, that's what we've got here on the next slide to some degree. Because the next part of vampire sucking your time away is fire drills.
Yeah, and
right
a lot
after
of
status meeting.
Yeah, well, it's I don't know how you got access to my calendar. This looks no, but it's true how you hope sometimes it's on there, but most of my fire drills are drive-bys. Where I've got my calendar full, and then inevitably the boss, a colleague, Cindy, might come by and say, hey, it's just going to take 20 minutes. It's not that big a deal. I just want my face photoshopped onto a monkey, or something like that. And we don't realize how much time that sucks from that creative process, that content generation.
Absolutely. And then my other favorite part is waiting to get the answer on the whole approval process, going back and forth, review and approval. Do you remember the days when you would actually have a clear jacket for the printed materials that went from one department to another and got carried around as a job ticket? Ancient times.
Yep.
And people still do it that way.
I was going to say that's still kind of common. We worked with a client last year who actually, as we talked to them about having a single source of truth where they could get approvals for things, they were concerned that their job was at jeopardy. Well, what do you mean? I don't get to, walk around the office and get people's signatures or drive across town or, so part of it is, I guess get with the times, but also some of the people you need approval from, they're hard to get, just like the cat and mouse picture here.
Absolutely. All you want is 2 seconds of time from them, but you might miss them anyway.
Yeah, and this is typically the executive that you need the approval from. And so you hound them down, you print it out, you put it on their desk, you put it on their windshield of their car. There's a lot of tricks I've seen.
Yes, too bad they're flying somewhere instead.
And then you realize they're out of town for a week and a half.
Exactly. So really it comes down to the process, though, doesn't it? This content chaos is a result of the process. And it really does put our organizations at risk when information is unavailable or spread across multiple points.
Well, and I love the graphic here. We use a similar graphic when we talk about, processes get put into place to try to solve the right things. So often as marketers, whether it's content marketing or anything else, we do try to put processes in place to solve the problem. But in the process of building these processes, we build a labyrinth and nobody knows how to navigate it. And it takes 3 months to bring a new person up to speed on, well, you got to go talk to Cindy, and then you got to talk to Jill, and then Damien's got to sign it. And a good friend of mine that works at an agency, she was telling me literally it took her 3 months before she felt comfortable with the process that was in place just for approvals.
Wow, I think that's true at a lot of places, though.
Yeah, it absolutely is.
Let's take a look at some of the ways we can fix this. I think, both you and I have had a lot of experience deploying technology to help solve some of these problems. But really, if you were going to pick just 1 or 2 technologies and not, I think on a recent Workfront survey, you found that most departments use 13 or more technologies. What would you recommend?
Yeah, and it's back to that graphic you had on process. You try to do the right things, but you get the wrong results. You may choose Google Docs to share a spreadsheet with somebody, and then you use instant messaging to let them know that it's available. And then you use email to send the latest asset. And, back to your point of 13 different technologies, the way to solve that is you really need that single source of truth. You need a hub where everybody can access that latest asset, that latest, get the approvals that are needed for that asset. Heaven forbid, and right before this webinar, we were talking about people get sick. And if people get sick, who's gonna approve that? Who's gonna pick it up? Or a webinar that I recently did, the partner we were on with talked about how when she was at an agency, the person left and had all the files for this particular print ad on their computer, and they ended up pulling the wrong files, and that's what went to print. So having that single source of truth, to me, is so critical because it eliminates some of that chaos.
Exactly. I think the other thing that you get from that when you have a single source of truth that's pulling data from numerous other sources is you can start to see the ROI. You can start to do contextual, personalized campaigns, and you can just see real-time data across everything, and it eliminates the need for these status meetings. The other thing you and I were talking about the other day is going Agile, applying Agile to things outside of the development department, applying it to marketing and creative.
Yeah, this has been probably one of the hottest topics that we've talked about of late is how do you change kind of fundamentally what happens within, especially creative teams. And really, if you think about it, creative teams are just using a different media. Engineers use code. In the case of a creative team or content team, you're using words and pictures, but you're still trying to communicate something to the user. So Agile, it's kind of scary, I guess you would say, for some marketing teams. One of the clients I was talking to that's adopting this said, their biggest challenge has been just people getting comfortable that this is okay to do, that we can still get quality output by following an agile methodology.
Yeah, it does take some getting used to, but I think that, and we actually use this at IOI, where we kind of have a scrum meeting every morning, maybe 15 minutes, and just make sure we're all focused on the right things, that there aren't any blockers, and then we get going. And it really has made a big difference in how much output of content we're able to do, as well as our ability to focus on the priorities and let the rest of that fake work fall by the side. I love this example that you guys have from your own internal creative team. Do you want to talk to this?
Yeah, so Dave Lasway, who's our creative director, within Workfront, we have some Agile capabilities. And again, you can see here it doesn't blaringly say the word Agile on this. This is a burn down chart, is basically what it's called. But like you talked about, those Scrum meetings, and all that is a quick touch base with everybody that's working on things for the day or for the week and what needs to be accomplished. So everything you see here, you can see at the far left what's new, what's in progress, what's awaiting some sort of verification, then finally what's been completed, and then the burn down through the week. So every week they get together at the beginning and say, here are the new projects, and they make assignments. Then they work on them. Then they can get the verification. If it's something that needs to get thrown out, it gets thrown out. This chart, in fact, they put up on a big screen TV, and anybody walking past can see, hey, there's my project. It's getting worked on, and they can see a status, or they can go into Workfront itself and get a status. But Dave's done several speaking things. He's going to be back out at How Design talking about this again. But I highly recommend, especially content marketers or creatives, looking at their workload, looking at this type of process, because it does fundamentally change the amount of work you're able to produce.
Well, absolutely, and to go home on time as well. I can't tell you how many great creatives, especially agencies over the years I've talked to, that they spend their day doing the creative work, and then only even a few years ago they would spend at least 2 hours packaging it up onto a hard drive to ship the hard drive wherever it needed to be by the next morning.
Yeah, which is crazy. But like you said, getting some of my own time, we've been talking about work time at this point, but I do have a life outside of work.
No.
Or I want to, I should say.
There you go. So creating killer content and sparing Bob's life. I think the bottom line is that you need a digital marketing hub where it's the single source of truth, and that you can keep all of your assets there. And people can only get access to the assets that are the right version that they're allowed to use. It sounds so simple, but putting this in place and getting everyone to adopt it is actually a trick. You were also sharing that you normally recommend that the creative team be the first team at a large enterprise to adopt this, and then other teams that work with the creative team start to see it, and then next thing you know, they're lining up. We see the same thing with digital asset management systems, that we usually recommend to deploy it within the print production or digital media, or whichever department has the most content chaos, if you will. And usually they see immediate benefits, and the next thing we know, people are lining up asking to be part of the system.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The groups that have the highest level of requests, they have high team engagement, they are, having to provide visibility to everybody in the organization. Those teams, like you said, the creative team especially is one of those teams that everything goes through. Whether you're producing a white paper, something that's going to go online, a banner ad, whatever it may be, I guarantee you that most marketing content hits the creative team during that process. The other part that you touched on too was that adoption. And what's so important is, it's more than the technology. It's about a fundamental change in the culture within the organization. In some cases, it may mean a reorganization of the team. It could be a transformation to an in-house agency and putting very specific goals and measurements that you want to do. But we always recommend that if your team's not ready to make that change, getting a tool is probably not going to solve your problem.
No, it's true. So at the end of the day, creating killer content, sparing Bob's life gets all about this content marketing hub. You get the on-time, faster projects, much more easy to collaborate and see statuses. You can find your content. You can make it personalized and contextual in terms of your messaging, both internally and externally across any channel. My favorite, though, is the consistent brand assets that lead to the best customer experience. The last thing you want is some old version or a permutated version of your brand assets getting out. The example we always used to use is the last thing that McDonald's would want is, you know, the golden arches being mixed up with Hello Kitty or something like this, right? Depending on.
It'd be funny, but it wouldn't to the outside world.
Yeah.
But certainly for inside, there's a partner that I talked with in the UK, and there's a very classic. Speaking of McDonald's, there was a classic ad that went out, and if you're familiar with the Big Mac and know the jingle, you know it's got 2 pieces of cheese, right? And the piece of or the ad had a Big Mac with only 1 piece of cheese on it, and that's how it went out. Well, you know, that consistency, brand experience is so important, especially in this multi-channel world that we live in, where you could be creating content, but so could hundreds of other people within your organization.
Exactly. And the Big Mac should look the same no matter where it is.
That's right. I want 2 pieces of cheese.
So we were talking about the content marketing toolkit and being that technology-wise, you really want to just have a few key tools, maybe 3 or 4. You need to integrate very smoothly, and either you're looking at optimizing workflows and getting new ones that automate a lot of the processes you might have been doing manually in the past, creating more efficiency. Or the other thing that we see a lot is that companies need to take a close look at the way their review and approval processes work and the way they do their project management, because like we talked about before, the approvals can take so long when it goes back and forth, or if nobody knows the status of a project, that can take a long time too.
Yeah, and the 2 key points I think are so important, that we're not saying that a solution like Workfront would come in and replace all of those tools. In fact, many cases we're integrating with a lot of those things, and that's where IO integration, of course, comes in, and being able to take a broken process, or you know, take a tool that could still be leveraged and integrate it with a single source of truth. And then I love your second bullet too, which is don't overdo it. Marketers love to do it with gumption and really want to have the very, very, very best, which is great. But at the same time, you know, if you bite off too much, then you're going to end up failing.
Exactly. So I think we want to summarize at this point and get to some questions. So the top 3 things we talked about was rolling it out gradually. So starting with the creative team and then ramp up and get them using the dashboard, and that you can expand this to other teams in the organization. And then you can complete the rollout by getting the entire department or departments on board. And what you'll really find is that this results in breaking down the silos that have been created. I mean, if you think about how organizations were, you know, even 100 years ago, everyone worked together. It was very fluid. Whereas now, because each department has its different ways of working together, they have their own internal hub of where they collaborate together, but it's siloed and not available to all of the other parts. And if you can break down the silos, then you can have this single source of truth and everyone working off the same files and assets.
Right. You said this term to me is smash the silos, and that's ultimately what you're trying to do. Doesn't mean everybody has to sit in the same room, because we know that's not always feasible, but certainly has to feel like we're all collaborating and working together.
Exactly. So ultimately, if you've got a marketing hub or a better way of doing your workflow management, I think that it results in more content more efficiently coming your way. No more excuses for not getting it done or for it being late. Yeah,
and just like you were saying earlier, it's about about quality versus quantity, because at the end of the day, we get tired of our content long before our customers. And I think once you are comfortable with that and you're able to measure it, then you can do all these things that you see on this slide.
Exactly. So this wasn't rocket science. You really can get to easy street by having your tools play nicely together, having collaboration dashboards, and eliminating the bottlenecks within your own team. And with that, I think, Cindy, we want to turn it over to you for questions.
Alrighty, thank you so much, Jill and Richard, for that fantastic webinar. That was a lot of great content that you guys went over today. So we're going to take some questions from the audience. Please go ahead and type them into your questions box, and we'll answer them as they come in. Let's see here. We have the first question. What are some tracking systems you put in place to understand what content is working besides Google Analytics? That's a great question, and I know that that's a highly sought after answer when it comes to content writers and content creators. So, Richard, would you like to answer that?
Yeah. So in the case of Workfront, we're not in and of ourselves looking at the measurement of the content once it's been released. So what we do is we integrate with a variety of different systems, all the way from Marketo. If you're an Eloqua customer, there's another way to look at it for those types of assets. Some other things that we do, and this also just depends on what you're trying to measure. We've put out a series of white papers and other things on what you should be measuring to see what's effective about your content. But most everything we do is gated. And so I realize that can be kind of a cumbersome thing for end users. But at the end of the day, being able to track, the consistency and things like that are so important to us within our content marketing. Other tools that are out there with LinkedIn and a variety of other things. I tell my kids all the time, if you don't want to be tracked, don't do it electronically, because there's, pretty much anything can be tracked, and those are just some of the tools that we use.
Yeah, and same from IO integrations perspective. Obviously, we deploy both Workfront as well as SendShare and other types of digital asset management systems and things that can act as a content marketing hub. And what they do is they actually do measure in real time. They pull the data back from all of those different channels, whether it be SlideShare, LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and it pulls the data back in so that you can see all the metadata that's associated with each asset and each campaign, and you can literally measure how many people you've reached, including reposts and views. So at that point, you can determine which assets are performing the most highly and then reuse them in other markets or verticals or however you see fit.
Yeah, we do I think, really good job, our marketing operations team, in tracking assets in all stages of the funnel. Because what's interesting is a particular asset that you think may be drawing in the early stage funnel may actually be working more in a later stage. We also look at the influence of assets, because one of the things that we probably all know is when a customer finally engages with you as a vendor, they're already well over half the way down that road of making a decision. So it's critical not only that you create killer content, but that you track that killer content and make adjustments if needed.
Yeah, absolutely. We usually come in at the phase where they've already put together their requirements, and sometimes it's done well, sometimes it's not. So a lot of it is just educating people on what different systems can do, what different features they've considered or have not considered, and helping them with that. So that's what we actually do with our professional services organization, is we go in and help companies figure out where their problems are, what can be automated, what can be made more efficient, and whether they even need more technology or just to integrate what they have.
Great, beautiful. All right, so this next question I think strikes at the heart of what you said earlier, Jill, about a lot of marketing departments being cost centers. So this question here is, can you touch on budgeting frameworks across large corporations for content strategy? How are they done, and how are they different from content marketing budgets? So Jill, would you like to tackle that one?
Yeah, so in terms of figuring out the budget for content marketing, the key statistic there, sad to say, is that 80% of the C-suite doesn't tolerate any kind of experimentation, if you will. So with that in mind, I sat in San Francisco with the Content Marketing Institute. I think they had 50 of us in the room. They were like VPs of marketing at different companies. And what was interesting there is over half of people raised their hand that their senior management team didn't even know that they were doing content marketing or that they were experimenting across different channels. So I think the tune to figuring out the ROI and how to ask for budgets is knowing what makes the person you're asking tick. So if they're all about ROI, then you're going to need to be able to show that. If they're all about certain channels or print materials or digital or webinars or events, you're going to need to layer some of that into your budget. But then you're also going to have some sort of slush fund in there that you can eventually show is working or not working, and that you can show that you're measuring and adjusting as you go. But it really does come down to you've got to have some experimentation built into it, or you're not going to know what is successful for your business to reach your key customers at the right part of the funnel.
Yeah, we have similar discussions, and I know IO Integration, you probably have many of these about that budgeting framework and how do you generate the right content marketing budget. Having gone through that myself, what I think shocks executives at times is just how much that costs, and if it, in fact, it is my largest part of my budget, even more than salary. And so it's important to be able to show that return on investment, or they will simply look at it and say, oh, well, you really don't need a white paper. You really don't need that. You don't need to do a webinar. Those are some of the first things that get cut if you don't show the return on investment.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Joe.
Sorry. I was going to say we do a by the numbers where you can, every year we go down through each of the types of channels that we've produced content for, and we show how many leads came in from that as well as sales wherever we can. And that really, yeah.
No, I was just going to say, because that is the reason that you want to track it all the way along, because in previous companies where I worked, when you're starting budgets for the next year, what ends up happening? Q4, I've got extra budget, so I'm going to spend it on spiffs and T-shirts and, pretty silly things, because if I don't spend it, then I don't get it next year. And wouldn't it be better to have a content strategy of, I know what I did, this was effective, so I need more money than I had last year, and here's the return on investment. So that single source of truth plays so critical into that budgeting process, for next year or even next quarter to show that return on investment.
Absolutely. So that segues really well into our next question, which is, if you are a new marketing team within a large enterprise, how would you suggest going about showing the rest of the business how important marketing, and specifically content marketing, is to the rest of the corporation? So Richard?
Yeah, this, I have a slide in the deck that we show about, the curse of the undervalued department. So marketing is becoming more and more important to organizations, and we know that, and you guys know that. But it's how do I then show it to the rest of the organization, which is what this question is. So to me, it starts with that single source of truth. How do I gather all that information into one place so that I can then put a measurement to it? You can't track, or you can't measure what you can't track. And so first, gather it together, put it in that single source of truth where everybody's working, and then start to layer onto it those metrics. We work extremely closely with, as Cindy mentioned earlier, I'm part of the product team actually in creating strategy, but I rely on the marketing operations team to be able to pull those numbers. So I sit down with them on a regular basis and say, this is what I need to track, so that they can assign those to the content that I'm creating. The person on my team that's responsible for content, she is constantly looking at what's working in the funnel and what's not, and making those things available to the sales organization, and so they can see what content's working and what messages are working. But like I said, I would start with a single source of truth.
Yeah, when I think about selling my well, basically what you're trying to do is sell marketing to the rest of the organization, aren't you?
That's
so
right.
I always think about that as having an internal PR plan. Something I've used in the past is at really large companies, we've actually done lunch and learns or posters and different kinds of contests to make them aware, in addition to having our own internal web pages and that sort of thing that lists a lot of the statistics and key aspects of what we're doing in the department. More recently, I've been trying something. We see a lot of B2B marketers do these snackinars. I don't really like marketing that way, but for internal purposes, we've started doing some snackinars to keep everyone aware of what's going on in marketing. Another interesting thing that points to the importance of marketing in organizations, and if you really had to prove yourself, I guess you could pull these types of numbers, but it's kind of the demise of the CIO, if you will, because marketing is starting to have so much of the technology that runs the workflow across the organization. Like you said, it all comes back to creative. There was an article this morning in the Wall Street Journal that CIO's importance is diminishing and that a lot of C-suites don't even have a CIO on staff anymore.
Yeah, you're exactly right. The CMO, I think it was a Gartner report that came out, the CMO is going to outspend the CIO literally by the end of this year. And so back to my point, marketing is not only important, it's critical. And being able to show that it is critical requires all of those things that both Jill and I talked about. I love your snackinars. Maybe they'll do a cocktails with creatives, something like that.
Yeah, that is a huge problem we see, though, especially at technology companies that are, they start off as engineering-driven organizations, and as much as marketers and salespeople like to think that they're important to the organization, the culture of the company, and in many companies here in Silicon Valley in particular, is it's engineering run. So you do need to get engineers on the side of marketing to at least make them aware enough and respectful enough that you can work well together.
Couldn't agree more.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Jill and Richard, for this webinar today. We are coming up on the top of the hour, and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. So thank you for attending this webinar today. If you think of a question that we haven't gotten to today, please feel free to reach out to Jill or Richard. Jill at iointegration.com and Richard Whitehead at workfront.com. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a great day.
Thank you.